Hello, I'm Keith Hocton, author, historian, and host of Rearview Mirror Chronicles, where we take a look back at the people and the moments that shaped our world through history. When you think of great love stories, there are a few that seem to shine brighter than the rest. Not because they end well, but because they captivate and capture everything that makes us human. Love, ambition, courage, vanity, sacrifice. The story of Lady Emma Hamilton and Admiral Horatio Nelson has all of that and more. There's a magic to it. It's a story that begins with glory and ends in silence, yet somehow it never really dies. Two people from entirely different worlds, a coal miner's daughter and an admiral in the Navy, who found each other in the chaos of empire and fell so completely, so recklessly in love that the world still hasn't quite forgiven them for it. Emma Lyon was born with nothing. No name, no money, no place in the world. But what she had was energy, a brightness that made people stop and look. By the time she met Nelson, she had already reinvented herself more than once. She'd been a maid, a model, a muse, and finally the wife of Sir William Hamilton, the British envoy in Naples. She could entertain a king, disarm a court, and speak 3 languages fluently. Not bad for a girl who started off scrubbing floors. And of course, then there's Nelson. By the time he sailed into Naples in 1793, he was already a man built out of contradictions. He was tiny in stature, delicate, almost very shy in person, but he was utterly fearless in battle. He was blind in one eye, he was missing an arm, he was scarred from head to toe, and yet he had the sort of charisma that made people believe he could move oceans. When Emma met him, he was exhausted, he was ill, and he was hungry for something more than duty. She was radiant, she was kind, she was funny, with that quicksilver wit that could melt any reserve. What began as friendship quickly became something far more dangerous. And when they finally fell in love, they didn't tiptoe around it. They fell headlong, as if the world didn't exist. Theirs was not a discreet affair. It played out in front of servants, diplomats, and even Sir William himself, who smiled politely and poured more wine. The scandal was enormous, but neither Emma nor Nelson cared much about gossip. They were living at a different speed, the speed of myth. By 1805, Nelson had been fighting wars for over 30 years. He had become Britain's hero. He was adored, he was celebrated, he was almost worshipped. But he was also tired, and he knew that his luck couldn't last forever. And so, we come to that October morning, the 21st, in 1805, off the coast of Spain. The sea was calm, too calm, the kind of stillness that feels like waiting. On the deck of HMS Victory, Nelson stood in his blue coat, staring out across at 40 enemy ships, massive ships of the line. He turned to his flag captain, Thomas Hardy, and said quietly, "Before this day is out, Hardy, England will have done her duty." And he said it in a way that only a man who knows his time has come can actually say it. And when the signal finally went up in the flags, England expects that every man will do his duty. It was more than an order. It was a benediction, if you like. The men cheered, the drums rolled, and the great ships of the line began to move forward, cutting through the morning mist like giants. Now, here's the thing. Nelson had dressed not for battle, but for immortality. His coat gleamed with gold braid. Across his chest, medals flashed in the sun. He had the Order of the Bath from Cape St. Vincent, the Orders of St. Ferdinand, and Merit from the King of Naples, the Order of St. Joachim, and the Ottoman Order of the Crescent, all put there with an effect to show the enemy who he was. He was never supposed to go into battle wearing this kind of regalia. So in effect, he stood there glittering like a beacon, half in the sunlight, half in the smoke, a bright, steady point in the chaos. And the reason that he wore it was for his men. He wanted his men on the other ships to be able to look across to the Victory and see their admiral standing front and center right beside them. His ship, the Victory, was at the spear end of the attack. It was the first one to break through the other enemy ships. And unbeknownst to him, on the French ship Redoutable, a sharpshooter took aim. He was such a shining target. One shot was all it took. The musket ball entered his shoulder, passed through his spine, and lodged in his chest. Nelson fell instantly. Immediately, Hardy was down on his knees next to him. "Hardy," he whispered, "they have done for me at last." They carried him below decks, down to the dark, crowded cockpit. The air was thick with blood, smoke, and the cries of other wounded men. The ship's surgeon took one look and knew there was nothing that could be done. To be fair, Nelson knew it too. "You can do nothing for me," he said quietly. "I am gone." For 3 long hours, he drifted between life and death, asking again and again, "How goes the battle?" Hardy, when he finally returned, knelt beside him, and he said, "My lord, we've won." Nelson smiled faintly. "Thank God," he whispered. "I have done my duty." And of course, then his thoughts turned to Emma and to their daughter Horatia. "Take care of poor Lady Hamilton. Take care of my dear Horatia." He looked up, eyes already dimming. "Kiss me, Hardy." Hardy bent and kissed him gently on the cheek, and stood to go, and then turned back, completely overcome. He knelt again and kissed Nelson once more, this time on the forehead. Nelson stirred. "Who is that?" he asked softly. "It is Hardy, my lord." A small-tired smile crossed Nelson's face. "God bless you, Hardy," he said. And with that, he took his last breath, and he was gone. Later that day, they placed his body in a cask of brandy to preserve him for the voyage home. And I know that sounds really grim, but it was the only way to bring him back to England intact. When the Victory reached Portsmouth, the entire nation was waiting. Bells tolled across the land. Shops closed, the king wept. Nelson's funeral in January 1806 was the grandest in living memory. And if you could just picture this, folks, over 1 million people lined the streets of London just to pay him homage, to say thank you for what he did. London fell silent as his coffin passed through, draped in black and gold. But one woman wasn't there. At Merton Place, Lady Emma Hamilton sat alone. There was no invitation, no mention, no carriage. The government ignored his dying wish. Nelson's brother inherited the titles, the estates, and the money, and left Emma with nothing. The woman Nelson had called his wife in all but name was quietly written out of the story. England mourned its hero and forgot the woman who had loved him most, forgot the woman who had made him what he was. For a time, Emma tried to keep the illusion of life alive. She left his hat hanging by the door, his chair by the fire, his telescope by the window. She'd sit at dinner and open his letters and read them aloud, whispering the words that he had once written to her. But reality eventually caught up. The debts mounted, the servants left, and by 1808, Merton Place was gone. The furniture, the silver, even her portrait, all sold. The same society that had once bowed to her now crossed the street to avoid her. And when the threat of prison came, debtor's prison, she gathered her daughter, Horatia, and fled to France. Calais, if you've never been there in winter, is a cruel place. It's cold, it's wet and grey, with a wind that cuts straight through your bones. And it was there that she rented a house near the harbour, where she lived out her last years. Every morning she sat by the window, staring across the channel towards England, whispering, "He will come for me." But of course he never did. Her health failed, her beauty faded. She wrote letter after letter to old friends begging for help. Most went unanswered. Even Nelson's brother refused her. Horatia, 12 years old, did what she could. She cooked, she cleaned, she kept her mother company. She didn't yet know that she was Nelson's daughter. Emma had never actually told her. By January 1815, Emma's body gave up. she was 49. They buried her quietly in Calais beneath a simple stone. Across the sea, Nelson lay under the dome of St. Paul's, England's eternal hero. 2 lovers, 2 graves, a sea between them. After her mother's death, Horatia returned to England. She was taken in by old friends of her father, and in time, she built a quiet, dignified life. She married a Norfolk clergyman, Philip Ward, and had 10 children. She never spoke publicly about her parents, ever, and when asked about Nelson, she'd smile and say, "He was a great and good man, and I was proud to know him." But in private, she kept a small wooden box tied with a faded blue ribbon, a ribbon that Nelson used to tie his hair with. Inside were her parents' letters, his bold hand, her looping script. The ink had faded, but the love still leapt from the pages. Horatia lived to the age of 81, long enough to see her father's column rise above London, long enough to know that his name would never die. And sometimes, when the sea wind blew through the trees outside her window, she swore she could hear her mother's laughter, wild, bright, carried on the tide. And that's how it ends, not with cannon fire or celebration, but with silence. Nelson, the immortal hero, Emma, the forgotten lover. Yet the truth is, they can't really ever be separated. Nelson without Emma is marble without warmth, a statue without a heart. She gave him joy, and he gave her immortality. He once wrote, "Without you, I am nothing." And for all her faults, she believed him. They rose from nothing, shone like fire, and they burned out together. He was eventually immortalized in marble, and she was buried in poverty. But together they gave the world a glimpse of what it meant to live, and to love without fear. Nelson once said, "I am prepared to die, but never to lose her." And perhaps in some way he never did, because love like that, love that has that magic, it never vanishes. I think it drifts just beneath the surface of time, like the tide, waiting for the world to remember. And in doing these 3 podcasts, that's effectively what we've done. This episode of Rearview Mirror Chronicles is brought to you by Entrepot Publishing, the home of independent storytelling. We publish books that celebrate history, art, and the extraordinary people who make life fascinating. You can find our titles and maybe your next great read at entrepotpublishing.com. Thanks for listening in, everyone. Bye for now.